I want to welcome you to the Center for the Study of Citizenship's annual Citizenship and Constitution Day lecture. It is a pleasure to have you here. I'm Mark Crewman. I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Citizenship and the chair of the Department of History here at Wayne State University. This program is done in collaboration with the Michigan Citizenship Curriculum Collaborative. I have to get all three of my C's in the right order. A collaborative group of intermediate school districts throughout the state of Michigan, and today's program will be integrated into high school curriculum for seniors in the coming years. So it's a very exciting collaboration and a great opportunity for not just you, but students around the state to hear Roger Smith speak. Professor Smith is the Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also the chair of the Penn program on democracy, citizenship, and constitutionalism. He has been in charge of the program since its inception, and it was an appropriate choice by the University of Pennsylvania because Professor Smith is perhaps the world's leading scholar in the study of American citizenship. When I had the honor to travel to Italy to assume a Fulbright professorship, I took with me only 5 or 6 books, one of which was Professor Smith's, and you could tell by the weight of it that I really wanted to have it with me, is Civic Ideals, which is an extraordinary study of American citizenship, and I recommend it highly to you. Professor Smith is going to talk today about Lincoln and Obama, the terms of union. Give him a big welcome, not only because he's a distinguished political scientist, not only because he will be giving a terrific talk, but because he is an absolutely rabid Detroit Tigers fan.
Today is the 222nd anniversary of the signing of the Constitution in my new hometown of Philadelphia, and it seemed an appropriate occasion to discuss two presidents, Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama, who are, even though it's early in the Obama presidency, already historic figures in America's struggles to cope with perhaps its greatest constitutional challenges, first the ending of slavery, and then the achievement of sufficient civic equality and inclusion that Americans of all racial backgrounds have an opportunity to be elected to the highest office of the land. I'm going to suggest that Lincoln and Obama are further linked because more than most political figures, they each made their understanding of the Constitution, their vision of the terms of constitutional union, the purposes and endeavors that bind together we the people of the United States. They made these constitutional visions central to the central themes of their political careers. But I will also suggest that there are differences in the substance and the specificity of their constitutional visions, differences that are worth reflecting on in considering the prospects of American constitutionalism in the years ahead. Now let me note that this linkage of Lincoln and Obama is one that is commonly made, not least by Obama himself. And he makes this linkage not simply, I think, for political advantage, although there are political advantages, but also because in important respects he has taken Lincoln as his guide. And so I want to begin with some considerations about the parallels and similarities between Lincoln and Obama more generally before I focus on their understandings of the terms of the constitutional union and the role that these understandings played in Lincoln's career and are playing in Obama's career. The connections between Obama and Lincoln were dramatized when Obama first announced his campaign for the presidency, doing it on the steps of the old state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, which is incidentally also my original hometown and the hometown of Professor Ron Brown, who's here with us today. And the old state capitol building in Springfield is where Lincoln launched the road that led him to the presidency by giving his famous House Divided speech. And by choosing that location to announce his presidential campaign, Obama made the linkage to Lincoln visible, and he returned to Springfield in the old state capitol to announce his selection of Joe Biden, and has returned periodically since. It is true, furthermore, that if you look at the careers prior to the presidency of Lincoln and Obama, the two careers are probably more amazingly similar than those of any other two presidents you can name in history. Let me just suggest some of the parallels. Lincoln, originally born in Kentucky, raised partly in Indiana, but then spent his adult life in Illinois. He was a lawyer for his career, but he made his mark because of his remarkable speeches as an orator, and also as an author. He published his speeches in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and that served as a widely read book that helped his path to the presidency. He encountered early obstacles in his political career. He lost his first race for the Illinois House of Representatives. He went on to spend 8 years in the Illinois State Legislature and also 2 years in the U.S. House of Representatives prior to going to the presidency. His early career was notable for his opposition to the Mexican-American War. This was the central theme of his time in Congress. And also because from early on, he argued not for the abolition of slavery where it stood in the southern states, but for policies that would put slavery on the path to ultimate extinction in the United States. And when he ran for president, he was an underdog to a senator from New York, William Seward, who was considered the leading member of the new Republican Party at that time. And if you look at, and he then went on to name his rival, William Seward, Secretary of State. And if you look at Obama, he of course born in Hawaii, as we emphatically know, and grew up, but then spent his adult career in Illinois. He is a lawyer, but famous for both his speeches and his books. He lost his first race for Congress to Bobby Rush, He spent 7 years in the Illinois State Legislature, in the Senate, not in the House, but a similar period. And he had been in Congress, the U.S. Senate, for 3 years prior to announcing his presidential campaign. That campaign centered initially on his opposition to a war, to the Iraq War. And throughout his career as a lawyer and as a political figure, he has been identified with the cause of civil rights. And his presidential campaign also involved an underdog triumph over a famous New York senator, in his case Hillary Clinton, a senator whom he also went on to name Secretary of State. And so here are the two New York senators in question, and I think you can see that there is some stunning parallels in the lives of these two men. But there are also sharp differences. Lincoln made his campaign theme, the central theme of his career and of his constitutional vision. The central theme of his campaign was no extension of slavery to the territories, and that was an enormously divisive issue. So Lincoln was elected with 39% of the vote, the smallest plurality of any president in history, able to squeak through only because 3 more pro-slavery opponents divided up the predominant pro-slavery vote. Obama did not make his campaign, or his success in the campaign, didn't come so much because his central issue was the centerpiece of the campaign. He instead was elected in part because of the economic crisis that the country fell into in the fall of 2008, and he had not run primarily on economic issues. Again, his campaign began with opposition to the Iraq War. He was elected with a much more substantial vote. He got a clear majority of the national vote and a substantial coalition, so that's a sharp difference in the way that they entered the presidency. Whereas Lincoln's position precipitated a national security crisis, the Civil War that dominated his presidency from the outset, Obama's central issues were not involved in the creation of the economic crisis that has dominated the early years of the Obama administration. So those are differences. But I want to note, because I don't think it's always understood, that even in regard to economic issues, there are many more parallels than might first meet the eye. Even though Lincoln was absorbed in national security, Civil War issues, his administration nonetheless saw an extraordinary explosion of domestic economic initiatives, partly to support the war, but partly to implement a vision of national governance in the economy that Lincoln had long embraced. And that vision is one from which Obama explicitly takes guidance in confronting the economic issues of today, both rhetorically and in substance. Obama has regularly invoked Lincoln's economic philosophy. Lincoln said on more than one occasion, in regard to the economy, government should do for a community whatever they cannot do or cannot so well do for themselves. Notion being that, yes, people should do for themselves as much as possible, but there's some things they can't do, and there's some things that government can do better than people can do for themselves. And that justifies an active governmental role in relation to the economy. And his examples included things like public roads and highways, public schools, but also social assistance, charities, pauperism, orphanage, estates of the deceased, and the machinery of government itself. These are lines that Obama has often directly quoted or paraphrased, saying, for example, last year, that government should do that which we cannot do for ourselves, and his examples are similar: provide a decent education for our children, invest in new roads and new science and technology, and ensure a shot at success for every single American willing to work. And the similarities are not simply rhetorical. If you look at what happened in the 37th Congress under Lincoln and the 38th Congress, there was this extraordinary burst of national economic, regulatory, and stimulus activities, which included a high tariff, it included new taxes, it included new currency, it included creation of what is now the Internal Revenue Service, it included the Homestead Act, making land available to farmers for development, the creation of the new Department of Agriculture, the creation of the Moral Land Grant College system that gave us so many of our state universities, assistance to expand transportation infrastructure through the Pacific Railroad Act, as well as forms of social assistance, military pensions. And he went on to establish a new system of national banking through the National Banking Act, to encourage science and research through creation of the National Academy of the Sciences, and to encourage more opportunities for people to succeed by working in America through encouraging immigration of labor. Obama's national economic programs, similar in substance, in structure, in themes. Lots of money for infrastructure, roads, bridges, wind, solar, mass transit, as well as today, energy conservation. Fund to support public colleges, funds to support schools, as well as social assistance programs, and of course, substantial effort both to save but to reform the banking and finance industries. Now, you may say that we think of Lincoln, though, as very different from Obama. Obama in contemporary politics portrayed as a reformed figure, and by his opponents, perhaps as a dangerous radical or socialist, and we tend to think of Lincoln as a more moderate and centrist figure. But here, too, I want to suggest that parallels are greater than we might suspect, and if there is a contrast, it actually goes in favor of Lincoln more often taking bolder, unconventional positions through the early part of his career than Obama did. Lincoln may not have been perceived as so risky a figure as Obama, and so maybe he could take more risks, but the point is that he did. In his first race for the Illinois State House of Representatives, he wrote that he supported the right to vote for women on the same basis as men. And he did this in 1836, 12 years before the Seneca Falls Convention that is ordinarily seen as the start of the women's suffrage movement. This was not a popular position, and he did not pursue it in later years, but he did push the envelope on that issue. And a year later, he was already saying that slavery was unjust, and while the national government could not interfere with it in the states, it did have the power to abolish it in the District of Columbia, and he supported that policy. He, as I've noted, challenged the Mexican War as wrong, a position that again proved politically counterproductive as that war became a popular one. And he also insisted not only did Congress have the power to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia, by 1848 he had what became his signature issue, that there should be no slavery in the territories. He also opposed the nativist or know-nothing movement when it was at its height. And rhetorically, in 1857, as he began the road to the White House, he ventured further than any other politician at the time, mainstream politician at the time, was willing to do. He insisted that while African Americans and whites might not be equal in all respects, and some of his passages on that theme are not very attractive. He nonetheless said that in regard to the basic rights of the Declaration of Independence, a black woman is my equal and the equal of any white man who ever lived. And to say not just African Americans, but African American women were entitled to the rights of the Declaration of Independence, this was a startling thing at the time, so startling that he dropped that too and began saying a black man is my equal and the equal to any white man who ever lived. But the fact is that you can see Lincoln pushing the envelope repeatedly in his career. There is no such record in Obama's legislative career. The two boldest things that he did in the Illinois State Legislature, he did vote for driver's licenses for undocumented aliens, although that was never a campaign theme. And of course, he did oppose the Iraq War from the outset. But otherwise, there isn't such a substantial record. Both are, in certain ways, pragmatists, centrists, but with aspirations to a reform agenda. And to understand those aspirations, it's important to understand their visions of constitutional union. And let me begin with Lincoln's, as he expressed it in speech in Independence Hall in Philadelphia in 1861. Lincoln's election was so controversial that he took a roundabout circuitous route to get to Washington, D.C., stopping in a number of major cities to give relatively short addresses to inspire confidence and support for the Union. Mostly, he said innocuous things, but in Independence Hall, he got a bit more expansive, and he addressed the question when the country was facing disunion of what the real source of constitutional union in the United States was. As he put it, I have often inquired what great principle or idea it was that kept this Confederacy so long together. And his answer was that it was something in the Declaration of Independence, written in Independence Hall, something in that declaration giving liberty not alone to the people of this country, but hope to the world that all should have an equal chance. And he was referring, of course, to the words in the Declaration, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The notion that human beings had equality in this sense, equality of basic rights that gave them an equal chance to succeed, this he took to be the fundamental principle and purpose of the American Union. Now, he recognized that human beings are not simply identical in all respects, and he recognized that the country was a long way from achieving even that equality of basic rights that he took to be the standard that the Constitution set, much less the whole world, as he says here, realizing that equality of basic rights. But he argued that in defining that principle, the constitutional framers meant to set up a standard maxim for free society, which should be constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors everywhere. That, for Lincoln, was the basic purpose of constitutional union, to pursue the realization of the principle of equal rights for all, and ultimately not just within the United States, but in all the world, and for people of all racial backgrounds. That was the broader constitutional vision. Importantly, Lincoln also had this specific issue that embodied his vision and gave him a concrete policy to implement it. That signature issue, again, was no slavery in the territories. It didn't satisfy abolitionists who wanted slavery abolished by the national government immediately in the southern slave states. And Lincoln didn't think that the national government had the constitutional power to do that. But he believed that if slavery were banned in the territories, so that the country eventually became overwhelmingly free territory, that slavery would die out. Slavery would be put, where he thought the framers intended, on the path to eventual extinction, and he thought that the American Constitutional Union's purpose demanded the policy of no slavery in the territories if the Union was to be justifiable at all. And so he adhered to that always through his career. Now, that claim I just made is sometimes disputed because there were times when Lincoln would say, if I could save the Union without ending slavery, I would do so, and that makes it sound like his vision of union is only concerned with preserving the Union, but not the Union understood as having the purpose of putting slavery on the path to eventual extinction. But with historians like James McPherson, I believe that if you look at those relatively rare statements in historical context, you can see that they are tactics to build support as Lincoln continues to adhere to a policy of no slavery in the territories, which he believed and the South believed would put slavery on the path to extinction. It's because the South believed Lincoln was right about that his election on a platform of no slavery in the territories led them to secede. And rather than bring them back by retreating from the principle of no slavery in the territories, he insisted on it, he adhered to it, he accepted civil war. And indeed, in this same speech in Philadelphia, he expressed the depth of his commitment to the notion that the Union should be saved, but it should be saved only with the commitment to the principle he saw in the Declaration of Independence as expanding the realization of equal rights for all. He said, in regard to that principle, if this country cannot be saved without giving up that principle, I would rather be assassinated on this spot than give it up. Then he said, perhaps I've said too much here today. So that was the constitutional vision and the substantive issue that embodied it for Lincoln, his understanding of the terms of union. What is Obama's understanding? He has defined it in many speeches, but I'm going to turn to another speech given in Philadelphia during the 2008 campaign at the National Constitution Center, a few hundred yards from Independence Hall. This was the speech where the controversy over Reverend Jeremiah Wright's comments compelled Obama to do something that he has generally preferred not to do, to focus on issues of race in America. But in so doing, he reiterated what I take to be the central theme of his political career and the substance of his constitutional vision. And that substance could be described as a commitment to e pluribus unum. As he put it, this nation is more than the sum of its parts. Out of many, we are truly one. It has been Obama's signature position or constitutional understanding that while respecting and maintaining our diversity, Americans can nonetheless achieve a greater sense of unity and a greater sense of common purpose than we have in the modern past. And as a man of such extraordinarily diverse background himself, his commitment to public service is the example of how we can achieve unity from diversity that he wants to inspire us all to embrace. And in speaking to African Americans in his Philadelphia speech, he stressed that this path, out of many to be truly one, that means binding our particular grievances to the larger aspirations of all Americans, and it requires all Americans to realize that your dreams do not have to come at the expense of my dreams. Let us find that common stake we all have in one another. This is what Obama urges over and over again. Again, respecting, preserving our diversity, let's find the common ground that nonetheless promotes a sense of unity. He returned to Springfield, Illinois for his speech at the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birthday in February 2009, and this was again his theme. Our individual liberty is served, not negated, by a recognition of the common good, shared sacrifice and responsibility for ourselves and one another. That is the very definition of being American. So this e pluribus unum theme, those are the terms of union for Obama, but it raises the question, well, given that we do have lots of diversity, how do we find the common ground, the common stake, the sense of shared purpose that inspires shared sacrifice and responsibility? And in that regard, Obama turns to his understanding of the Constitution, which he does read through a kind of pragmatic lens, pragmatic in the philosophic as well as the political sense, a pragmatic lens that is skeptical about strong absolutist ideological claims and that focuses on discovering through engagement and discussion of our concrete problems really where we have areas of common interest and common values that can define common purposes. He understands the American Constitution as establishing processes through which this kind of practical-minded quest to discover common purposes can take place. In discussing the Constitution in his book, The Audacity of Hope, Obama says, the elaborate machinery of the Constitution is designed to force us into a conversation, a deliberative democracy, in which all citizens are required to test their ideas against reality, also to persuade each other, and to build shifting alliances that are facilitated by the fact that we should all entertain the possibility that we're not always right and highly fallible. So recognizing pragmatically that none of us has a handle on ultimate truth, having some uncertainty about our own notions of ends and means, that can facilitate participation in a discussion where we come to understand other points of view, find common ground, find common purposes. That's the Obama vision. And yet, he knows there are some problems with this vision. One problem is that a politics of dialogue and pragmatic accommodation may mean that people who are actually championing what is right feel compelled to compromise and concede and give away too much. People whose interests and purposes are in fact unjust. We do need some sense of standards to say what kinds of accommodations are legitimate and what kinds of accommodations, what outcomes of deliberative discussions have to be deemed unacceptable. And Obama knows that. He says, I am robbed even of the certainty of uncertainty. For sometimes absolute truths may be absolute. And so there are some kinds of outcomes of deliberative democratic processes that aren't acceptable. In confronting this political dilemma, Obama says explicitly, he turns to Lincoln. He says, I'm left with Lincoln, who understood both the deliberative functions of our democracy and the limits of such deliberation. Lincoln never abandoned conviction for the sake of expediency, but he did make a lot of practical compromises with forces that are pretty ugly in order to try to build coalitions to accomplish his ends. But in Obama's view, Lincoln kept in balance these two contradictory ideas, that we must talk and reach for common understandings, striving for e pluribus unum, and we can never act with certainty that God is on our side. And yet, at times, we must act nonetheless as if we are certain. We must sometimes say, this is right and cannot be compromised away. So the understanding of the Constitution as promoting pragmatic dialogue and accommodation to achieve e pluribus unum, but at the same time as having some absolute sense of purpose that can't be sacrificed, that's Obama's constitutional vision. But unlike Lincoln, Obama, thus far in his career at any rate, has not defined a signature issue, a concrete policy that actually embodies this sense of e pluribus unum, but e pluribus unum in the direction of certain kinds of purposes that represent moral absolutes, standards that we have to try to fulfill. His emphasis so far has been more on pragmatic accommodation and not the indication of what is the ultimate purpose that sets the standards for what sorts of accommodations are acceptable. He has, in recent months, focused on moving toward universal health care as perhaps that issue. And you can see this constitutional philosophy, this constitutional vision at work in his healthcare speech recently, where he's urging us again to show concern for others, reach the unum out of our plurality. He says, concern and regard for the plight of others is part of the American character, a recognition that we are all in this together, that when fortune turns against one of us, others are there to lend in this hand. A belief that in this country hard work and responsibility should be rewarded by some measures of security and fair play, and sometimes government has to step in to help deliver on that promise. That is who we are. That is our character. This suggests an understanding of constitutional union in which the government does have responsibilities to make sure that all Americans, certainly all minimally responsible Americans, have their health and well-being assisted by government when struck by circumstances that they can't control, and that government has an enduring responsibility to provide for public well-being in this way. It remains true, however, that the Obama e pluribus unum vision, exactly why this is morally required and exactly what policies are dictated by his sense of purpose and principle, this is less clear than it was with Lincoln. And it is this contrast in the specificity of their constitutional vision and the policies that accompany it that I think raise the most serious concerns for whether Obama can have the kind of success in pursuing his vision of the terms of union that, after enormous adversity, Lincoln ultimately did. Obama's vision of e pluribus unum has to be further elaborated in the years ahead, given more content, specificity, and policy substance, and it must do so, I want to note, in the light of at least two major challenges to the notion that through dialogue and pragmatic accommodation we can find common interest. Two central challenges for this constitutional vision in the 21st century. The first I term the multicultural challenge. And it arises that precisely because historic efforts in this country to impose common standards on human beings were often used to say that all those who didn't conform to a white middle-class male American norm could be limited or denied rights, that has led in a country that is also more diverse via immigration in terms of ethnicity, religion, and race than ever before. It has led to embrace of more multicultural ideals, and actually multicultural ideals by the right and left, which say, with conservatives saying, as in this quote in the United States, that those who want traditional ways of life should be allowed to preserve them against national initiatives to define common standards. But there are also a range of non-traditional white Protestant religious and ethnic communities in the United States that similarly want considerable autonomy to pursue their distinct ways of life without having common standards imposed on them. And Obama's desire to respect diversity means that he's committed to supporting some kind of policies of multiculturalism that allow for diverse ways of life for diverse communities in the United States. But how one manages to achieve this sense of unity while respecting and recognizing this extraordinarily expanded diversity, given that many traditionalist communities are sharply opposed to many of the communities representing our greater diversity, that's an enormous challenge for Obama in the 21st century, for American constitutionalism in the 21st century. And it is also compounded by a further challenge, which might be called the cosmopolitan or globalization challenge. Note that in his effort to foster a sense of unity while respecting diversity, Obama lays heavy emphasis on the unity being defined as what is American. The healthcare speech ends saying we should care for the health of our fellow Americans because that's part of what it means to be an American. That's who we are. That's our character. The unity that's being defined is a national unity, a unity as Americans. But I think you'll all be aware that in the 21st century, identification primarily with one's nation state is increasingly and understandably controversial. And Obama himself, on many policy issues, says that we need to look beyond American national interest to promote forms of regional and international cooperation in which the unity we're seeking is not confined to bringing all Americans together, as difficult as that is. It also involves trying to seek greater unity with people beyond our borders, and governments beyond our borders, and social movements beyond our borders, to deal with transnational problems, economic problems, environmental problems, problems of immigration, and so forth. But if the quest to achieve unity out of diversity is cast primarily in terms of what it means to be American, then it's not clear that those understandings will lend themselves to coping with these more transnational, cosmopolitan challenges. That tension between what it means to be an American and broader aspirations is not new. Remember that Lincoln defined the purpose of the Constitution that he identified with the realization of the principles of the Declaration of Independence as a purpose that ultimately went beyond addressing unjust inequalities in this country, but sought to achieve equal rights for people of all backgrounds everywhere in the world. It is an element of American constitutionalism from the outset that American Union is justified or has been justified not simply as something that is good for Americans, but that as something that ought ultimately to contribute to all the world. But how to do that? How to achieve unity while respecting diversity in a more multicultural America, how to achieve unity while seeking to serve not only fellow Americans, but ultimately the people of all the world. These are serious challenges to the Obama constitutional vision, the Obama understanding of the terms of union. And so, whereas Lincoln had an objective, banning slavery on in the territories and ultimately putting slavery on the path to extinction that had more specific substance and clear endpoint, Obama lacks that kind of agenda at this point. That's not to say that he can't find it, that he can't define it, that he and we can't achieve it. It is to say that the quest to do so has become the central issue for American constitutionalism and for our understanding of the terms of union in the 21st century.